I'm running a halfway house. I'm going to make a treatment center. If this guy can get this, there's absolutely no way that I can't do something. So I had this little counseling agency, and I'm doing that. And I took my son's bar mitzvah money, and I found an apartment building, and I bought it. And I said to myself, they're going to give me a mortgage on my house, and I can make this happen. I can make this happen. I'm going to make it happen.
Welcome to another episode of Entrepreneurship and Recovery podcast. I am so grateful that you are here. Once again, this is a podcast for anyone who is an entrepreneur, who is looking to find their way into a life of recovery, and defining recovery is up to you. Recovery is a pathway that you define, and that could be freedom from your addictions. It could be freedom from procrastination, workaholism, whatever that is for you. For some of you, it's just the recovery from playing small. This is also a podcast for people who are not entrepreneurs, who are here to better their life, to be an intrapreneur, to just live their best life. So I'm so grateful that you are here. Welcome. If this is your first time, this is now going on 48 episodes. We just crossed a milestone of, I think, a couple thousand downloads, 4,000 or 5,000 downloads. And you may say, hey, that's not a lot of downloads, but for what I do and the time that I spend on this project, which has increased quite a bit recently, I'm very excited. And I want to thank all of you who have tuned in. And I want to thank all of you who have subscribed to the YouTube and left a review for the podcast. Thank you. And again, I'm excited. So let's just take a reminder to breathe. Take a nice deep breath in and, step into that self-regulation. And hopefully with some of the episodes and the guests that you have heard here, that you're learning about ways to take care of yourself, maybe in ways that you never thought were possible. And I think that's what this is really about. How can I take care of myself more in 2025? Make that a priority. Self-care. How can I take great care of myself? Because the more you take care of yourself, the more that you can serve others, even if it's just taking a few minutes in the morning and a few minutes at night for yourself to maybe record your thoughts, get outside, put your feet in the grass or in the snow, get some earthing in, and take great care of yourself. With that said, I'm excited to welcome my next guest, Dr. Harold Jonas. Harold reached out to me quite a while back, and we connected, and he has been doing this, let's say, sober lifestyle for quite a long time. He founded sober.com. He has quite a story. He's sort of a pioneer in the tech sector and addiction recovery and industry. And I'm excited to introduce him on my show. If you haven't heard of Harold before, he's all about multiple pathways of recovery. He has such a story of resilience that I'm excited to share with you all. Excited to get into the conversations that we had, hopefully as an entrepreneur in recovery, if that's something you're interested, or learning from someone who's been doing it for such a long time. So with that said, enjoy the show. Hey, Harold, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you again. Really grateful you reached out to me, and we had some prior conversations because I might have come across your stuff over the last decade and didn't know it. And I'm really grateful that you're going to come on the show, let my audience hear who you are, what you're up to in the world. And yeah, I'm just really excited to dive in with you.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's always something new to share, always something new going on. So where do you want to start? Where do you want to pick up?
Yeah, well, let's start with letting the audience get to know you a little bit better. So I would say let's do it at a high level. Tell us about your story and then how you found entrepreneurship. So a little bit of the background story of your story of recovery, and then let's get into the entrepreneurship.
Okay. So I got off a plane chasing destination recovery in 1987. I got off a plane in West Palm Beach. My father, who had disappeared from my life and the family's life 5 years prior, found me. I had just gotten off the street, and literally off the street on a cardboard box in Camden, New Jersey. So this is a good deterioration story, full of color, I'm sure. That's not unfamiliar to anybody. but the recovery story has way more highlights than anything else. So he finds me in this tenement because it's wintertime coming into South Jersey. And we got off the street, me and my running buddy, and she was awesome. One of those rehab romances, .com, by the way. So there was that. We were just settling into our pickup off the street furniture, and he knocked on the door. And when he left, he wrote back a letter offering me an opportunity to come to South Florida to be near him and put me into a rehab. Now, this is 1987. It's the fall. In 85, I had started attempting to change my life. It wasn't looking real pretty. The bottom was looking up. I mean, that's how it got. That convoluted, addictive logic was going on real hard. And I was settling into like this was my life. And it was going to be short and sweet. And for some reason, the methadone clinic I was at, I shared the letter with my alleged counselor, whatever she really was, and she offered me cab fare to go to the airport right from her office. She said, just jump in the cab. Don't change your mind. Don't look back. Just go. And I waited till the next few hours and jumped on that plane, got off the plane, then wound up in multiple settings over the next 4 months and just stayed drug free since then. So from there, the message that we grew up with in my home, when you go kind of segue into entrepreneurship, this same guy who was self-employed and had done very well for himself financially with his ninth grade education, total depression baby, made it clear to us that if you didn't work for yourself, you were essentially a loser. And that was the level of love and acceptance I chased from him ever since, right? Ever since I can remember hearing it. So that was it, from that point on. So when I got clean, he's like, let's go in business. Now, this is a man that was incredibly unmanageable, that had started like freebasing cocaine in his late 50s and chasing young girls and, living wild and crazy in Costa Rica, of all places. And I just knew for some reason that was not going to be a good idea to sustain recovery, was to go into business with somebody as crazy as he was. But yet he had all the means and resources to do so. So it was this toss up, throughout. I chose grad school. I chose grad school because that was the lost dream that had woken up when I got clean. That was the one they said, what you ever want to get accomplished when you, that whole thing beyond your wildest dreams. And that's what I did. I went to grad school and learned how to be a psychotherapist and moved that. It's my first foray into entrepreneurship and recovery.
Yeah, and you went to Antioch, and that school is my first therapist. When I was 22, rock bottom, was arrested, facing charges. My court-assigned therapist, who changed my whole life, actually graduated from Antioch. So I have a really personal connection, and I became a psychotherapist too, eventually, because of her inspiration. So small world.
I wonder if she had that T-shirt that I got. It said Antioch Radicals. And I still have it somewhere in my stack of T-shirts that I don't wear, but I still own. And that is 1989. That's when I entered school. And this is the reason of all the places to go, because all my peers were going to like traditional grad schools here, becoming social workers. They were sitting in classrooms, taking midterms and finals. I could never do that. I couldn't do that. I already had 4 kids, and that was never going to be a reality I could ever make happen, to sit in a classroom and dedicate that kind of time and commitment. So it was the first true online school, for lack of a better way to describe it. The school's in Ohio. I'm in South Florida. I flew up there twice for these intensives, and I had to find my own professors here to teach me and mentor me. That was the whole program. Excuse me. My own professors, my own methodologies of evaluation, my own coursework, blah, blah, blah. And that was really amazing training ground for any number of skill sets that were going to be beneficial in business or in life, because you had to do it yourself. So you were thrown to the wolves. It was just a whole different kind of educational experience.
Yeah, and that's what she told me. She had since passed away, but she had an amazing impact, and she had told me about Antioch's approach to, psychotherapy and teaching, and it was really fascinating. And I have another friend too who's been on the show, Cynthia Whitaker, who went to Antioch, or at least she teaches there. She might have went there too.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I'm really curious. So you went on and eventually got your doctorate's a PhD. And what I'd like to know is, what have you learned as a doctoral level therapist? What have you learned about addiction? And how has it changed since when you first learned about addiction in the past to what you believe addiction is now?
So this is interesting. When I was early in my career, and I still cite this, I would argue with the traditional clinical staff. I was in a psych hospital, and the word dual diagnosis was just being bantered about and being invented as a way of approaching things. And I came from a 12-step model, and everything was 12-step oriented in my philosophy of approaching things. And they would just sit back and be very patient with me until I read enough books to realize that was like a left-hand turn from everything that's really taught about the way people behave and the way they believe, especially that word codependency. So the big argument one day was codependency versus dependency needs that were unmet in childhood. And that seemed to make the most sense to me. I wound up becoming more oriented toward cognitive behavioral therapy and looking at life from stimulus and then the belief system that it gets filtered through, and then what we think. So addiction really just, I was talking to somebody I supervised today for their licensure, and it was really about very sexual. Addiction is really about sexual kind of saturation and that dopamine that just explodes in your brain that stays with you, depending what drug you're using. So amphetamines are really short-lived and they wear off really quickly, and you got to redo them, and you can't really get that sensor as activated as you want. And then when you use opiates, that first year, maybe 2 years, it's good 4 6 hour run, and then that shortens and shortens and shortens. So because of your tolerance. So it became more of a brain disease, and now still back for me, behavioral. It's still about a choice that we give up because we may never have had one because of the programming. It comes from culture, it comes from family, it comes from our peers, most essentially, and then living it and then dealing with it as a dad. That was the most challenging thing. Every one of my kids touched it. Every one of my kids touched that relationship with chemicals. Two of them stuck with it, one of them to their detriment, and the other one to a fatal detriment. So that's the kind of experience I have from different perspectives with addiction, whether it's behavioral addiction, what do we call, when Stanton Peele will call process addictions, right? Gambling, sex, food, etc., and/or chemicals. So it's all similar.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's going to speak to it, you have decades and decades and decades of experience, and family members be impacted by it. I do like what Gabor Mate said about
Mm-hmm.
heroin. It's like a warm hug. I personally have done that, and it's just like growing up. It's like not getting those warm hugs and affirmations and appreciation and being heard and being seen, and then you find something like OxyContin or heroin, and next thing you know, you're getting that warm hug. So it's a really interesting take on
Yeah, yeah.
looking at it from a different angle,
I think
not
he's
just
being
brain disease.
very tactful when he says a warm hug, because I described it to my father as like getting a blowjob every day, all day. And that made him very, very attentive to what I was doing.
Mm.
Because he was busy on freebasing. He was like he wasn't like doing crack. He was freebasing cocaine in his late 50s, early 60s. And that was not that. I mean, it made him feel young again. It really, and even when he died, we so here's that story, right? I would visit him here with my kids, and he would try to be a grandfather, which was kind of interesting to observe. And and he would lock up all the drugs. Now he drank throughout his lifespan, and he still continued to drink until his very last day on earth. And every time we would leave on Sundays, I would say to myself in my inner voice, "This would say goodbye, give him a hug, make sure you tell him you love him because it's the last time you're going to see him." And sure enough, one of those Sunday nights was the last time, because that Tuesday he had been found and having had a stroke or a heart attack or an aneurysm, or we still don't know what it was, because either he paid the doctor to give him good blood results, because he would look at these, he would show me the blood results and his liver enzymes and shit, and he would say, "I'm in great health, I can still drink." I said, "Well, you always look at the using, and you never look at the stopping. It was always backwards." And that's the way it went. And everything would be locked up. And in the house, I found all the pipes and all the paraphernalia and all the stuff that any teenager would have in their house. right, to keep it from the being caught. And whenever we would show up, it would all be hidden and secreted away. It was kind of an interesting dynamic we had together.
Yeah. It's so
Right.
interesting, huh? Yeah, our
Yeah.
parents and the way it shapes. Like, I mean, let's be honest. I never wanted to touch addiction or trauma or any of this stuff, right? When I was a kid and like, but my dad died of alcoholism. There's mental illness running through my family. There's addiction like crazy. So I don't
Yeah.
think I chose any of that. It sort of chose me. So having this platform today to talk about this is really important to me, even though sometimes I don't want to do this at all. I want to go a different direction. I want to study animals or I want to do this. It keeps bringing me back because it's so prevalent, especially with food addiction. I would say today the foods are so highly addictive. The you walk through an aisle of a supermarket and you're just bombarded by all kinds of different chemicals and things that are very addicting. And I think today, like a lot of people will check in with me, and it's not to check in about stopping heroin or drinking.
No.
It's changing their diet. It's like people
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
checking in going, hey,
Yeah.
listen, I'm doing this and I've lost 5 pounds and I've done this. That's the addiction that I think is heavy, heavy, heavy in our society today is food. Would you agree
Well,
with that?
well, it's interesting you would bring that up. I have a son who's a pharmacist. He is 40, and his friends are getting colon cancer. His peer group, his cohort, that group, age group, are all getting diagnosed with cancer already, and they're all attributing to processed foods that they grew up on. And that's basically where they're coming from. They're not eating the green stuff. They've been eating packaged goods for their whole life, candy, sugars, carbs, nonsense stuff that's not good for them, and already are getting impacted in such a negative way. And you would think, oh, well, I'm going to change. I'm going to do something different. No, they're saying the same thing that we used to say. That's them, not me. It won't happen to me. I'm more conscientious. I'm only going to eat less. And I'm watching my son. He's now become a foodie, and he's unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he's married to a woman who has a challenge with her relationship with food. Because I approach all the addictions as really just another relationship model, a very unhealthy one, albeit whether it's an attachment disorder, whatever label we want to put on it, it's still a relationship. And that relationship can be, you got to separate and divorce, and you got to withdraw, and you got to go through that same process if you want to make that change. How do we motivate people to make the change? That's the wake up. So
Yeah.
when they look in the mirror and they see somebody back that they're not really impressed with, somebody they're not in love with, somebody they don't care about enough to eat healthy or to exercise, to seem basic things that we were taught in kindergarten. There's nothing new here that's not we haven't been exposed to. So yes, in that
Yeah.
regard, the food is definitely a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a topic that I'm going to be talking about more and more on the show. Sugar addiction, food addictions is going to be coming, and it's not even that I want to talk about them. It's just so prevalent in society. It is the
Yeah.
crack cocaine. It is the new crack. Is the food? What's in the food? And
Look at
that's all I have.
obesity. Great. The
Yeah, that
type 2
epidemic
diabetes
of
everywhere.
obesity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And the
and that's what
soda.
I'm getting. Yeah. That's the
All
people I'm starting to get now. They're not coming to me saying, I mean, some are saying porn addiction and sex, but that one's very hidden. But the one that's right in front is, hey, dude, I lost 20 pounds. I lost 10 pounds. I'm like, wow, just
yeah.
constant, constant,
Sure.
constant checking about this. So I'm just noticing a big trend, an upsurge.
Mhm.
And then you're watching people quit alcohol now out of nowhere in the last year or two. I'm
Right.
watching these massive, massive trends of people 1 year sober and 6 months sober. It's so
Mhm.
interesting
And they're not
that, oh,
alcoholic. They're not
no.
labeling themselves alcoholic and not treatment babies either. These are people that are choosing sober curious as the movement. I
Mhm.
don't know if you remember that. All the R's is the sober curious thing that has now evolved to be a worldwide phenomena of a
Yeah.
sober or drug free or an alcohol free lifestyle. So we have a list, for instance, on our website we're putting up as we get more closer to what we're here, or I'm going to get a chance to talk about. There's a whole list of venues that are non-alcoholic, right? And they're
Yeah.
doing now. I've been around long enough that we used to rent out a bar, like a nightclub in 1990, 1991, for one night of an alcohol-free night. And people would leave there after having an awesome time with the DJ. I mean, it was just like we were still actively using. That was the dilemma. And it was triggering. And that was another interesting word that seemed to pop up in today's world, this trigger. People are not coping effectively with the fact that they're exposed, right, to the environment or the stimulus, and then they choose to go out and use maybe a week or two after the event. but they haven't let go of it. They haven't let go of it. Continues to replay, and they had such a good time. They want to make that good time better, right? They want to enhance it with a chemical they know intellectually is going to wear off and it's not going to really do what they think it's going to do, but they do it anyway. So these
Yeah.
are the interesting nuances of addiction in its purest form. Well, we're
Yeah.
surfers, right? So you get it. You're
Yeah.
surfing now. So you
Yeah.
know that you get that wave and you got to
Oh,
go
yeah.
back. Got to go. Got to
Yeah.
get another one. Got to get another one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, surfing is what a lesson of life. The feminine, the masculine, the
Sure.
whole just receiving of and letting go and allowing the wave, reading the wave, but also the addiction of actually landing a wave and then
Yeah.
coming back to want a more and more and more. And obviously, we would look at that as like more of a positive habit or addiction, but I would say that it can become obsessive. People can stop focusing on their problems, and start
Yeah.
surfing,
When
and
I learned to surf, it was 1988, right? I was living on the beach in Delray, down here on the beach, and there surf's up, and here in Florida, where I'm at, surf doesn't come that often. Surfable waves, and so when it's up, everything stops. The world stops. Surf's up, and really, it's just like Flipper on TV. When surf's up, got to go, and they don't go to work, they don't go to school, they don't do anything. No relationships, no food, nothing, just in the water. And I was like, well. I've already got 3 kids and I want a career, but surf is looking pretty good, and it's up. And I watched it even as recent as yesterday, and it was really messy and sloppy. And I'm like, oh, I don't think I should go out because I know what's going to happen. I'll be out there until it's dark. That's the way it goes. And getting my ass handed to me because it's so messy. But yet the saturation, right back to that relationship and that oral sex or kind of real saturation that happens from those experiences in our brain and that chemistry, that saturation that happens whether it's cocaine or whether it's even sugar or whether it's surfing, it's that saturation that's so habit forming that we have to choose, right? We're giving up our freedom to choose differently and be quote unquote responsible to ourselves. The hell with everything else, to ourselves, most importantly, what's in our best interest, short and long term.
yeah.
That's what we lose sight of, right? Because the short term is so addicting and so habit forming and so pleasurable, right? So
Yeah.
who doesn't want that?
Yeah, I think that's really the point too of these conversations for me, it's to normalize addiction. You want to talk about the word triggered, bring up
Mm-hmm.
the word addiction and recovery to people who don't believe they have addiction or they don't believe they're in recovery and they're triggered as shit. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I'm just trying to normalize like people who have gone before me. And as you've gone before me to normalize addiction. It's like numbing out. I mean, this is like commonplace culture and society to
Yeah,
numb out,
yeah.
and that's addiction. So having this, just a brain disease model of this is so limiting and so
Mm-hmm.
medicalized. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, come on
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah.
This is like normalized in the food markets and then the Netflix and then the getting the likes and getting the,
Oh,
seeing your ex on Facebook and just freaking out and wanting to numb out. So I think, this is just a discussion that I'm just so passionate about, talking to thousands of people as a salesperson at Verizon and then talking to thousands of people as an entrepreneur about this subject. I've had people who I respect. I'll use the word recovery. Even the name of my podcast is triggering to people who are not in the world of addiction or maybe has touched upon it, but never really considered themselves with addiction. I've had people tell me like, in recovery, what am I in recovery the rest of my life, and get like angry at the name of my show. And I'm like, hey, I'm not
yeah,
saying you're broken. I'm just
yeah.
saying like we're
Well,
in
that's
we're in recovery from deep the so many things if we want to go
right.
there.
From breathing and from waking up and living in America for Okay, so let's redefine recovery. Now, back in, I had a coffee house. I started a coffee house. It had to be 2005. And Samsha came out with a redefinition of recovery. And I blew it up and I put a big poster outside for everybody to see it and read it because I was hoping that would, because they don't listen. They're too busy at that time. The iPhone had just come out and they used to talk to each other and then they started to text each other in groups. And then they were doing pictures like it was just, the phenomena of the new thing. So we put the definition up there, and the definition was really about recovery being getting back to an equilibrium. It wasn't about abstinence from chemicals anymore. It was about getting to an equilibrium where you could be productive and be your best self and move in that direction. And that's what recovery was. Now that's adopted here in 2024. This is 2005 when they started to introduce that. and the director of SAMHSA and NATAP, and these are all the big recognized authorities in this country about where all that came from. And that's really what people are starting to buy into now, because harm reduction is the new model. It's like, okay, the bar is so low, let's keep them alive, because if they're alive, they're hope, because the fentanyl is just killing them, and let's just set the bar low enough that harm reduction. Okay, you want to smoke pot, you want to drink, you want to try to manage your using. Good luck with that. We'll be here. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere when you choose a different pathway. That's what I run into privately, and people that I don't argue with them. I mean, I'm not going to lose the argument. There's no sense in arguing. It's really about, okay, where's the least resistance to get you back in the office for another appointment and the next appointment, the next appointment, not for my new car or my new car payment or my new lease or any of that stuff, but for you to help have a better life. That's the motive and the intent. Now, I've used that since I started in '88. That's how long I've been actively interacting with people in an agency setting or private practice and business. And that seems to be the most effective. Because when I want to push against that hard wall, I'm going to get tired. They're not moving. They're going to dig in deeper and put cement in the rebar of the block and dig in deeper. So, okay, fine. It's your life. I'm going to respect how you choose to handle it. Maybe you want to try a different way. Maybe.
Yeah, when you spend enough time in this world, which obviously you have, and I have spent a lot of time, is, when you start understanding how serious this addiction epidemic is, you have people in Canada who are addicted to fentanyl, and they're coming off of fentanyl with pure heroin. They're going to a clinic, getting pure heroin and coming off of fentanyl. Well, now they're actually living productive lives, shooting
Yeah.
pure heroin from the clinic. So now when we talk about harm reduction, people would hear that and go, that's outrageous. But it's like,
Right.
look at the amount of people who have died from overdose per year with opioids. If we can save 200, 1,000, 5,000 people, like what's happening in Canada, what is the problem with that? So these are the big triggering discussions and things that people don't even know about, because they haven't spent so much time, like you and me, so much time reading and listening and tuning in.
Tunnel vision, because they buy into this. And the paradox of the 12 steps is that honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And then you try to present a different view, and no, they shut you down. So I have a bit of a dilemma with that, because my community is saturated with people that's the only pathway, and it's that one or else no way. And which is sad, because there's so many different multiple pathways for people to get into a recovery process. And that's the flexibility and open-mindedness of what that's supposed to be. So I'm what they would see a radical, right? We were doing harm reduction and Suboxone in halfway houses before it was even trendy, so to speak, and before the industry adopted it as an IOP and PHP model, and that's what everybody's doing, or a large percentage, I should say. There's still pockets of people that are abstinence-based. Good luck finding them, but they're out there. The private models and stuff, but they're there, and do real clinical work, and don't just segue you into a free program in the community called 12 Steps. I think with the industry for quite a while.
Yeah, like obviously, if you've been around the block, you've lost a lot of people to suicide and overdose. You're going to have a certain view of this, and that's the thing that I'm not even pushing on this podcast, because I'm trying to bring up entrepreneurialism, all these different things that are. But I'm also, talking about these topics that people often don't pay enough attention to, because why would they? They got lives, they're building families. But when you're in this for long enough, you're going to see that there are multiple pathways to recovery, including, which is what we'll get into next, and then we'll get into some of your entrepreneurship endeavors, because you've really pioneered a lot of them. But I want to talk about this multiple pathways to recovery, because one of the things, and the guests that I bring on the show is very extreme for people, and they actually think that I'm going to rehab because it's so extreme. These people who own ibogaine clinics. So let's talk about this psychedelic assisted therapy movement. You've been in this for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
What are you seeing with what has been your experience with watching people, who are, many of them are treatment resistant? What has been your experience with psychedelic assisted therapies?
Positive, but again, I'm out of the box, So out of the box as far as my approach to everything. So when they started to allow us to even talk about psychedelic assisted therapy, I immediately got trained, with one of the agencies out of Colorado where they are allowed to prescribe ketamine. There's lots of ketamine clinics in my community where they're doing IV push, but nobody's there for the client. That's the experience I hear in the office when people have done that with these agencies. So they're just basically stuck in there. It's a kind of another money grab for a lot of places when you talk about entrepreneurship and this industry called treatment. There's some real gray areas, and then there's some real black and white, right? So it depends on the intent and what the motives are for whoever's doing it. Psychedelic intervention in and of itself is going to take over, I think, most of therapy in the next 5 years. That's how I see it projected. Dr. Mate is going to become really prominent as long as he's with us because he's aging. I think he's 10 years older than I am, and I'm 70. So, yeah, he's a World War II baby. He's a real product. He's got an amazing story as far as where his origins are. So, he's a plant medicine doc, and he believes in that, and he's carrying that message loud. Ibogaine has been around a way long time. I found Ibogaine in early '90s, and they were like, "You can't touch that. You can't have that. It's not allowed. You can't do that." I said, "Well, why not? Why can't we do home detox? Why do we have to put people in institutions? That's so crazy. Why do we have to uproot them?" And they're like, "You stop it. Just shut up and follow the rules." And I'm like, "But if that worked, I wouldn't be in business. I'd be another sheep along the same pathway of institutional living and open a treatment center and put 28 beds on the planet and another, it would be the same, same. And that's not really what works. So these are things that really help people get better quick because life is too short. I'm unfortunately one that has experienced significant loss, right? Significant loss in my life of part of the story of coming to South Florida and going to meetings was meeting my soulmate. I had sparks flying with this woman that was speaking at a meeting, and I spoke with her after the meeting deliberately with clearly the intent to get her name and number. And then she looked at me and she says, "I know you. I know you." And it turns out that we went to summer camp together as children. And I was like 9 years old, and she was 7. And she says, "You're the first boy I ever kissed." This is what she says to me. Now, we're 1,300 miles away from our hometown of Philadelphia. We're in Delray Beach. She's at a meeting. I'm at a meeting. And the sparks are flying, and the chemistry is really clear. Like those pheromones are just going through the room. And we stayed away from each other as long as we could. And then we pursued this romance, and it wound up, we got married. We brought a child into the world, for me, number 4, for her, number 1. And we proceeded to create a beautiful life and a family together. We stayed active in recovery to both of us. We opened houses. We provided service to the community. Her parenting style was different than mine. Mine was really about the one I grew up with. There's the deep end, learn how to swim. I'll be here to pull you out if you ask for help. If you don't ask for help, you're going to drown. So these are the lessons that I came up with from that same guy that brought me here. She was of the school that I will anticipate your every want and need and meet it before you even think it. And so therefore, our son had a different parenting style than my kids from my first marriage that we raised together. And cutting to the chase is that she loved him to death. He never learned how to self-regulate, in and out of institutions, in and out of treatment, in and out of every active drug there might have been, and never potentialized. And we lost him at age 27. And she did not recover from that loss to ever really get back into recovery. And then we lost her, right, in 2022. So in 2018, he's taken from us, and then in 2022, she's gone. Now my whole recovery family is like up in smoke, and they're gone, right? And so we talk about reservations. We talk about what would ever happen that I would use again. And these are instances that could have easily pushed me in that direction, and it didn't. And deliberately so. I made that choice right then and there that no matter what, right, that's the one we all make. No matter what, I'm not going to use today, right? Today. And, and, um, 'cause, I, 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 and You go forward, you recover, you move into recovery, or you don't, or you get swallowed up. Um, so that's the experience I have. I had sent her into a trip to Mexico and be exposed to the four agreements, which saved her life for a period of time, and but she couldn't implement consistently. She just struggled, with her own stuff, and she did her best, as she could at the time, and now she's at peace, and which is helpful. Um, and if there's any message for me to share with an audience, it would be that you can get through anything. You can get through anything that ever occurs in your life because we've been through it all where we live, and using's a choice. And when you get that restoration of freedom, and you get to exercise it, which is the gift of recovery, you have it all, right? Whether you're going to pick that wave or the next wave, or you're going to pick that drug or the next drug, or that addiction or the next addiction, you can just keep going and choose health and well-being over anything. So that's
Yeah, that's really, thank you so
Mhm.
much for sharing that story. And
Yeah.
I mean, as tragic as it is, I mean, looking at your demeanor, your energy, I can tell you've really done a lot of work on this, the grief. And I would, for the audience that's listening, what would you say has been maybe something that's really been pivotal for your recovery, going through these, I mean, unimaginable.
Life. But their life, it's life on life's terms, right? That's what they told us. It's going to show
Mhm.
up. And they being the predecessors before me, I before you, they said it's going to show up. So the big profound messaging is to the gift of freedom, which is comes with so much responsibility, which I didn't know, right? And this is what Gabor talks about, that the gift of freedom of choice, of how we want to think or feel. What comes to mind when I look at you and talk with you is Foster Wallace. I don't know if you've listened to that commencement speech. This is water. I recommend it highly. He's a little bit older than you, in your early 40s. David Foster Wallace, and he is this brilliant mind of your generation. And I got exposed to him recently this year. In a philosopher, a brilliant guy that was able to see things that other people have seen as well, but the way he put it made so much sense. It just continues to ring home. And I wish I could anecdotally tell you the story of this speech, but it's one you could find on YouTube. So it's called "This Is Water," and it's David Foster Wallace, and he wrote this book called Infinite Jest, and it's this big 1,200-page tome of a novel that he became very well known for, and it was incredibly well respected in the literary field. So something to look
Wow.
at.
Well,
It's really, it's a wow. It's a wow kind of thing. It's simple, but a wow. And that would be the depth of what I would have to share.
wow. Yeah. Well, I'll make sure I link that to the show notes so that I'm going to check it out after this interview, but also for the audience, because there's some important relevance to that person.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard that name before for sure through a couple of musicians. And yeah, I'm definitely
Yeah.
going to check that out.
Good stuff.
I'm
Good
really
stuff.
curious. Oh, sorry. What was that?
No, it's just it's really, really impactful stuff along the lines of Viktor Frankl, along the
Mm,
lines of some real existential stuff that really makes sense for us, especially as addicts, because that's the crisis that we're living in. That this whole thing of developmental cycle, right around identity and role confusion, 15, 16 years old. What do I want to be when I grow up? And well, if I never really grow up, I don't ever have to make that decision. So I'll just stay 16 forever or 18, somewhere in that range, and I don't have to be responsible, but I want the responsibilities of adulthood and everything that goes with it. But I really don't want, what I mean, this whole internal
mm,
conflict. And that's really what we work with when people show up and they stop using. It's like, okay, it's time to adult. Time to adult. Like no, let me go back to Disneyland. I want to stay in Orlando. You know,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I would be on Magic Mountain forever. It's great.
gee, wow,
Yeah,
Orlando. That's where it ended for me.
yeah.
Orlando was my last place before I was arrested, and
What a
the
spot.
journey.
Yeah,
Yeah, what a spot. Oh my God. But I want to get into some of the things that you've done. I mean, you've been doing this a long time. You bought sober.com, sold it. You know, you've been the archetype of an entrepreneur in recovery. So I'm curious about your endeavors as an entrepreneur now, because you've done things for a very long time and people talk about doing things, but you've done them. So let's talk about your Sober Life platform. Let's talk about some of these things and any story you can tell about sober.com. And let's get into some of this entrepreneurial endeavors.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when you say a lot of people talk about doing stuff, and one of the biggest issues I had before I grew up in recovery was quitting. That was the operative word, was quitting. If it became challenging or hard, I would whine and quit, and I was the epitome of victimhood, and nobody understood. Right, that's what it was. The immaturity I had, and I had potential. Right, that was the great word. There's so much potential. You would hear that over and over again, but nobody could seem to ever harness it or access it, especially me. And what I learned, that if I didn't quit and didn't give up so quickly, there was a good chance that I could be whatever that proverbial definition of success was. Um, so I had, so my first wife had a child when we were early in our separation. That's a whole podcast in and of itself. So I'm the father of three biological children with her, and then there was another child whose dad never showed up, so I was the default father for her, and proud to be so. But no legal adoption. She has my name and all that stuff, so she's incorporated into the system. And then Dawn and I, my second wife, had another one, so there were five. So there were five kids, and I'm like the sole supporter, and I'm working for minimum wage at a treatment center, entry level job in 1988, and I'm way behind in like everything financially, and I'm crying. I'm like, I'm never gonna, never, never. And I had all these absolutes in my vocabulary, um, and I got hired to do a contract for somebody to help them write a manual for licensing for a treatment center. And I took the job, and I said to this person, I said, I need you to give me the resume so I can submit it with the application. He says, well, what's that? I said, what do you mean, what's that? You're the executive director. You are the boss. It's your baby. You need to give me these things so I can say. He said, well, I never did anything. He said, I'm living in my car. I mean, somebody gave me the keys to this property, and here I am. I was like, oh, wait. You have no fucking idea what you're doing. He says, well, not really, but I'm running a halfway house. I'm going to make a treatment center. I said, oh, okay. And I said to myself, okay, if this guy can get this, there's absolutely no way that I can't do something. So I had this little counseling agency, and I was doing that. And I took my son's bar mitzvah money, and I found an apartment building, and I bought it. And I said to myself, they're going to give me a mortgage on my house, and I can make this happen. I can make this happen. I'm going to make it happen. And this is when Tony Robbins was still flying in on Sunday mornings on his helicopter on television, and he was still just starting. And I would look at it and say, I don't think I'm going to buy that book. I'm just going to do it. And so I bought this building and couldn't get a mortgage because I didn't have an income. And I didn't know that. I just went for it. So we found somebody. My wife and I, we found somebody to sign the mortgage for us. And they signed the mortgage. And the motives behind them was he had a son who was actively drinking all the time and the blackout drunk at 22. And he said, okay, I'm going to do this for you, but when the time comes, I want you to put him into place, and I want you to help him change and get better. They said, I will do that. I will do that. And so sure enough, that did evolve to happen. He signed the mortgage. A year later, my father passes away. Like I said, he just stops breathing, and we still don't know why. No real good, autopsy report. But he leaves a small inheritance, and I pay off my partner, and he goes away, and everybody's happy. Now I own this building, and I got 22 people in it, and it's full all the time, And then I found another property, and it just kept moving, right? So I'm in the real estate business, that's generating cash flow with people in early recovery, the recovery residences, because the philosophy is, here's a nice place to live, here's a healthy place to live. We're going to help you self-govern, because they taught us, there's books, there was a book from the government that talked about Oxford houses. They taught us how to do it. They published a book. I read the book. Oh, I got this. And that's how it went. Everything's in English. Can't go wrong. Follow the rules. Follow the directions, and there you have it. So we did a self-governing kind of residence. We wound up into 50 beds. I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with this picture because they're not staying clean. What do I do with them when they're not compliant? And there's no manual, there's no book, there's no referral resource to send them to another place. I go online and I create a website called soberhouses.com. And then I start buying domain names because it's a Wild West show. Wide open, 1998, 1999. The domain space was just for the pickings because nobody knew. Nobody knew. So I'm buying everything, and my blindness with this recovery thing was only limited to names in recovery. So I have this whole real estate portfolio of domain names, recovery related. I missed beer.com, I missed pencils.com, I missed toys.com. They were all there. You could have get them for $8. $8. These are multi-million dollar properties, right? And they were there. And who knew, right? So I'm leveraging people. I'm finding out who owns them. I figure out how to do that. Who owns detox.com? Who owns rehabs.com? I call them up and say, hey, you want to sell that? And they said, well, I don't know. I said, well, I'll give you a bunch of money for it. And they said, well, okay, fine. And that was the way it went. So I bought sober.com from somebody that was just sitting on it. They didn't know. Some place in North Carolina, bought it from them, converted everything to sober.com, created a continuum of care on the internet. We were one of the first directories online where people like your mom could go shopping for her little boy, Jesse, and find a good spot for them. Great. And then people would have websites that they didn't even know they needed because we would create them for them. We had a developer, we'd create websites and domain name. We did the whole 9 yards. And that was fine until Google came along and changed the whole world in advertising and online advertising. And it went from Microsoft and .asp, if anybody's familiar with things of that nature. This is archaic programming language now, to PHP. And it was a wide open code, open source code. And we didn't shift fast enough, blah, blah, blah. I wound up selling the site, made a shitload of money, and bought more houses and coffee houses and motels, and just continued to serve the recovery population in our community, and was having a blast. We were living a great life here in South Florida. You know, this is like tropical paradise. Treatment centers everywhere, housing everywhere, people in recovery everywhere. Every restaurant you went to, you had familiarity because that was the labor pool. And then the government was not real happy with us because we had a lot of notoriety based on the New York Times coming down and writing us this big article about how South Florida was the cesspool, shall we say, of the whole destination recovery model. And they were sending plane tickets to people and limos to people, you know, payphones, because they still had payphones then. And you tell them where you're at, and they would send a car. And you get in the car, get on a plane, get in the treatment, 24 hours or less. That's what was going on. And then we had the big urine screen boom. I don't know if you remember that history and how ugly that got, and nothing but Lamborghinis and driving around town because people were like using the urine they collected on Monday to submit it on Friday. It was same. It was just some real, because money corrupts. Money corrupts. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Money corrupts a lot of people. And I watched it, and it couldn't affect me. I'm a licensed clinician. I'm a family guy. I had too much I worked for to risk it for money. So I never crossed that line to the point where I would, give it up. So we had the website, we had the housing, we had the real estate, we had the motel, and all this shit going on simultaneously. And saturated, right? Saturated with intensity. And there's that addiction and workaholism and so forth that was happening. And, we could look at the parenting styles back then and how maybe my son was impacted by what he saw from his father. Because none of my kids are in business. None of them have decided to go in business for themselves because they saw what happened with me, right? I gave up a lot of sacrifice with simultaneous grad school, businesses, keeping the bills ahead and blah, 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 so they could have cars and insurance and health insurance and all the things that children need. Some of them went to private school, they went to university, all that stuff, because that's what our job is, as a parent. That's how I saw it. Safety and then education, safety and education and health. And those are the pieces that were prioritized.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the things you're saying is what you said earlier about freedom. You wanted freedom. You saw a guy who was doing it and you were like, if this person's can do it, I can do it. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
I started seeing people and I'm like, okay, I need to learn more about how to be more self-sufficient and how to actually create freedom. And there's all different types of freedoms, right? There's time freedom and all different
Mm-hmm.
types of freedoms, but freedom is a value, and that was a value you had. And you started out early, and you've obviously took your licks and learned from. And like, what that's kind of my next question. As an entrepreneur in recovery, what would you say if you could give us like your top 2 to 3 lessons of being an entrepreneur in recovery? What would you say to someone? Because there's many people in the post COVID world that are now looking to potentially start a business and maybe work for themselves or become a recovery coach full time. What would you say to someone? What are the top 2 to 3 lessons you've learned there?
Um, there's 3 P's that I really live by when it's business related or even in life, and patience, persistence, and perseverance. Those are the 3 words that are really, really critical. A lot of people, like you say, talk about being entrepreneurs, and then they mean well, and they really. What I've learned from my experience to date is that if you weren't hustling candy in the schoolyard, and if you weren't figuring out solutions to be independent at 11 and 12 from your crazy parents, because they're really making you dependent, and you got to ask them for stuff, which I was just totally contemptuous about. I couldn't stand authority. I couldn't. That's why I had to go in business, because I couldn't play by the rules. I mean, the rules just didn't make sense to me, and a lot of things, even today, and I've learned to keep my mouth shut when I get rules that just don't compute in my logical brain, and I'm like, really? Like most recently, just as an example, I put into the city for a color change. I want to go and change the color of the outside of my house. I had to apply to get permission to spend $10,000 to paint the color. And he said, well, we don't like, no, you can't use that color. I'm like, well, give me a reason. Well, no, we don't have to give you a reason because you're in charge. And I'm like, that so sucks. I'm a taxpayer. It's my house. I can do what I want. No, you can't. And so this is what the battle is, right? And that acceptance. So those are the other words: patience with yourself and with the system, whatever system you're working with. Persistence. To continue to see it through, you have to be persistent, and you have to persevere through all the challenges that are going to be presented, because there's going to be more challenges than easy roads forward. There's going to be lots of potholes and lots of boulders in the way, and it's easy to just quit and lick your wounds and say, "Oh, it's not made for me. Oh, it's a bad idea, bad timing." And be a victim of your own lack of patience and persistence and perseverance. I mean, most importantly, this thing behind me, this podcast turned out to be like we did the Sober Podcast, way 2018. I was already running a podcast, and I couldn't compete in the space because it was too expensive. And for what reason? The intent. There's so many messages out there around this. I'm like, well, this is saturated already. This is how many people are going to get the audience that Joe Rogan has and have that kind of influence? Like very few. It's like getting in the NFL. 1 out of 100 million people are going to make it and injury free and be a O.J. Simpson and running back and be accolades. So it's a very small pool. And again, the people that get to that level have those things. They're patient, they're persistent, and they persevere through the challenges. I sold the last project I was involved with, and then sat on my hands all of like 10 minutes and started Sober Life, right? This is the new project I've got going on. And it's a 3 to 5 year project to get entrenched in the market. It's not an overnight success like it was before Google, where there's not that big a void. There's lots of different things going on. So every time I turn around, there's more competition, which is what's great because they're educating the market, and then the best will rise.
Customers.
So that's what you have to be. You have to be not angry about, but be happy about, and recognize that that's helpful, and use that as your best selling point. Is that this is your choices. These are your choices of. It's a T-shirt. At the end of the day, it's a T-shirt. What it says on it is really going to be, it's still going to be used to wash your car at some point. Let's be serious. It's just what it is.
So
it's still
yeah. So that's so interesting. Like even today, 70 years old, you're still starting businesses, running businesses. And like today we talked about right before the show, you had a reel that you put out today or yesterday that's 975,000 views, which is pretty significant. And, you're still doing it. You're still marketing. You're still putting the brand out there. What are you most excited about at this stage of your life with these businesses? What do you hope to accomplish with Sober Life?
Well, we're looking to change the conversation. I mean, we're never going to really measure the value of that, but if we can get people to talk about things other than Netflix, and they're going to talk about addiction, they're going to talk about recovery, they're going to talk about mental health or mental illness, they're going to talk about whether the kid needs to get help and professional services, then we've made an impact. We won't see that tangibly resulting in anything. But, my kids say, well, why are you doing this? Like, why? I said, well, one of these days I'm going to make a lot of money and give you back your tuition for grad school. That'll be good. They said, really? I said, yeah, I'll write you a check. One of these days that's going to happen. That's the goal. And in between, we're going to make a societal shift. We're going to impact a societal shift. And people are going to say, oh, I've had people tell me I found my treatment center, found my halfway house on sober.com. That's more rewarding than the money I generated to have that advertiser up there. That somebody would just that is like says it all, right? Somebody taps, thank you, and we're pretty low maintenance, because if you're a high maintenance person and then the human services field, you're in the wrong business, right? If you do it for validation externally, it has to come from within. You have to be able to, I think, say to yourself, I did my best today, and hopefully somebody's been touched. But we will never know, and you have to live with that, right? And then you'll never know, and you don't have to know. You have to know you did your best, and that's what's important to me.
That's really what it's about, right? I mean, I could have never started this podcast. I thought about it for 5 years, and I could have never done it. And you know what? This podcast costs me money. It costs me time, costs me money. And the thing is the reason I do it is, in the last 2 months ago, I got a message from someone that I knew in the past, and they told me that they look forward every week, and I never would have even thought of this person having addiction troubles. And he told me that every week I look forward to your podcast. And this guy I look up to, and I'm like, wow, this is what it's about. It's about just reaching that person with my audience, which people don't want to get started because they're into validation addiction. They want the validation. They want the numbers. Well, I'm a great example of not having the numbers. And that can affect my ego at times. But for the most part, it's those messages I get that I'm like, my platform right now is reaching people like you. I'm reaching all these people who are reaching out. So I'm doing something right. And at the end of the day, it's about the feedback of, hey, thank you so much for bringing on these guests, going outside the box. We already have the Inside the Box podcast. So
tons of those. There's tons of those. But people that believe in plant medicine, people that will say ketamine, right now mushrooms are getting, psilocybin's getting a lot of push in some states, Colorado being number one. Where I don't know how or why, because it's a really interesting place out there. True Wild West, but they're doing that is getting pushed, where they're going to get the formulation for mushrooms. Now, the National Institute of Health and all the people that do research at Harvard, they already know all this stuff works. The pharma knows it works. They know ibogaine works. They've known for years. They outlawed it because it was going to turn the whole industry upside down. Would people get better? This is a medical model where people are not really designed to get better. They're designed to stay sick, so they keep going around and going around. So my argument and my belief, and I'm not a big conspiracy person, although some of it I might really consider, that if they could put somebody on the moon and bring them back in one piece, they could cure cancer, right? Whoever they are, they could fix this, right? They could fix it. And if we did functional medicine, and if we did proactive care prior to, and if we did good prenatal care and all childhood illnesses, people would not get cancer in 40 and have, a better lifestyle. There's ways to do preventative medicine and not call it preventative medicine, just call it health, right? Because that's really what it is. Healthy living from the time you're conceived to the time you die, and whatever happens in between, you're your best self. People go sideways, but they come back to the value system they're modeled, right? That's what happens when you look at development. They get modeled to make your bed, brush your teeth, wash your hands, wipe your ass, all those same. We're all taught the same things, and people go this way, and they're going to reinvent the wheel, but they usually come back, right? They usually come back because that's what works, and that's what made them highest level of contentment. And especially when you take away the toxic stuff, whether it's substances or behaviors or sugar. Sugar is like a really, really addictive kind of piece because it gets that mood, right? And that diabetic kind of thing, and hypoglycemic And I'm guilty. I get up at 5 o'clock
We all
in the
are.
morning. By 11 o'clock, I'm taking a nap if I haven't had food. My body's shutting down and I have to take a 10 or 20-minute nap. I'm sitting up. I learn not to lay down because I'll sleep for an hour. But if I sit in a chair, right, I can get up and go back at it and work until 11 o'clock again. Those periodic kind of what they would call cat naps. They got a
Yeah.
good life. Those cats have a pretty good life.
Yeah, those cats, man.
Those cats.
Just as we, sort of come to a close here, I do want to reiterate, these big platforms like, let's say, a Joe Rogan, and he brings on a lot of interesting guests and a lot of controversial topics. And you know what? It's not enough, not even close. So if anyone's listening to this and thinking about, having a podcast or interviewing people about outside the box solutions or writing books, please to God do it, because this platform here that I have and your platform, I mean, we are much smaller on the grand scale, but it matters. And having these discussions about, ketamine assisted therapy or any of these things we're talking about, we're talking about topics that are literally saving lives. And so you have a lot of people who have a lot of misunderstanding, and that's intentional because there has to be some type of way to control the whole market. And that's what's happening. But as we watch that sort of crumble and collapse, we're watching like Massachusetts about looking like they may pass a law for, psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, all to be, held by persons of age. I think it's 21 or 18. And, you're just watching things starting to change. And we're just in the midst of it. Watch the next 2 to 4 years, folks. Watch what happens in this space. As you said, the next 5 years, it's going to change a lot of things. And it's because these structures, these megalithic structures of power, are slowly starting to realize, oh, okay, there's money here, there's profit, but there's also people who are not tolerating and putting up with what we have done for the last couple decades. And, just coming into people with long-term recovery who are starting to explore these modalities, they're learning a lot. And I think that these are the discussions that I want to continue to hear and be talked about, and bring guests like you on to have these discussions, because it's saving. It's not even about like, oh, I'm quitting my addiction. It's literally life and death. And so we're watching people who are getting help through ibogaine, through ayahuasca, through ketamine assisted therapy. Of course it can be mismanaged and abused. Of course there could be no integration. Of course that's already been happening for eons. But we're watching now, as the more attention's being paid, we're watching recovery coaches getting trained in psychedelics. We're watching people now learning like how important integration is. And that's what we're looking at. We're seeing, okay, this is coming inevitably. Let's just try to do it the best we can, keep people safe. And that's what these discussions are about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting you bring up that's the second or third time I heard you use that term, recovery coach. So that was one of the pieces we started. I don't know how much time we have allocated, but in 2004, we started a school. We were started to train coaches in 2004. And that came out of the recovery management model from William White, and Chestnut Hill Health System in Connecticut was the pioneer in recovery coach and recovery management. That was the operative word back then. So we started doing that here in town. We did it live in person. And I found that challenging because people are people and they couldn't come, and life happens. And the live classes, as good as they were, it didn't make sense. So I used to fight with the boards to do supervision online, because I put the whole training online. And just to segue into how effective the coaching has become, it's become a standard throughout the country, and every state board now, addiction board, has a recovery coach nomenclature, whether it's a peer support specialist or whatever they're calling it. Anything but recovery coach, by the way, anything but that, because the word coach has now become universal. It's been in Europe for many, many decades as an effective tool. So recovery coach, no. Peer support specialist, yes. Forensic peer support specialist. So we created a course for people coming out of prison. So look at the halfway house model and now recovery residents. We look at now where all the money goes. And again, that's the operative push for pharma, and that's the operative push for a lot of businesses is money. Um, the whole building cities around prisons, especially in Florida. They'll build a prison, and then there'll be a community built up around it because of all the support services that are needed and the people that have to work there, and so forth and so on. So it mushrooms out. Stark is a really good example. I think they made a movie out of this. They called it that, something like that, a TV show, where the whole city is around the prison, right? The people that work there, multi generations of guards, etc., and the corruption, blah blah blah. And so, in order to keep recidivism to its minimum, we want to train inmates coming out in the system as they enter or exit to the system, and they can then play it forward to the people coming behind them and help them integrate back into the community because they're coming out. They don't know what a cell phone is. There's a guy, a friend of mine, he works for an international company. He says there's a guy that works for them that did 20 years. He's 42 years old. He did 20 years in New Hampshire prison. Now he's a supervisor at this international company, right? So there's an opportunity, even though you're a convicted felon and maybe you've done some heinous things, you can still make a go of it, even though it's very more challenging than it is for people that haven't. It's still doable. So mainly because of these kind of systems and beliefs that have to be re-examined and then just changed. We're not going to go black or white and take it away, but we can kind of massage it enough to give people that chance to be their best selves because they're in there. They're in there.
Sure.
They just haven't been able to. It's too layered for them to do it, but it's possible. And that's a great story. That's a really good story. I just heard it last week.
Yeah, I love
20
that.
years. He came out and it's good. That's amazing, right? That's just, and he's not a worker. He's not a frontline guy pushing carts. He's the supervisor of the site. I can't mention anything because I don't want to have him stepping on my toes. But but I could, but I doubt if I'll ever see this. But I won't do it. Just
I think what we're getting into is in the shadows. People don't even know this is going on. They have no idea the struggle coming out of prison. They have no idea what drug courts do. I mean, I've coached drug courts in Georgia for the last 3 years. You wouldn't even imagine the stories and the struggles. And that's the thing is we're not just shooting at the hip here for profits to try to push psychedelics as therapy. This is just looking at it from a lens of you have people who are millionaires living in the hills over here who are struggling with addiction all the way to people who literally have unimaginable obstacles that you could never dream of that are literally rebuilding themselves through a rehabilitation court and then literally starting businesses with felonies. It is so fascinating. And these stories cannot be highlighted enough. So again, once again, I feel like the message, your sober podcast, my podcast, other people's that are in this realm to get those stories out there because there's so many incredible stories that, I get to hear that I don't really get to share. There's laws and stuff protecting that, but watching people start to emerge and obviously recovery coaching. We talk about that a lot in this podcast. We've had people who are presidents of, International Association of Recovery, professional recovery coaches. We've had them on here. So, it's really important, folks. And that's really to me, the future is having someone who can help you integrate your experience, whether that's pornography addiction, fentanyl addiction, numbing out and life addiction, having someone to support and guide you as a mentor or coach. I love that model. And it should be part of every insurance package. When people go and need help, insurance should pay for it. Guess what? We're talking about this in 2024. Guarantee come back 2 years from now. Listen to this podcast. You're going to see insurance companies covering that more nationwide in the States. And we're just a little ahead of our time on this, but this is where we're going to see massive changes.
Biggest challenge I've ever had has always been not only ahead of the curve, but hanging off the cliff until everybody catches up. And then when they catch up, they pass me by because I'm still like, what the fuck? What the fuck? I did it with I did an app, an accountability app for drug court. They don't have any money. The judges in our area volunteer their time. Drug court started in Miami-Dade. I don't know if you know the history of drug court in and of itself, but it started in Miami, Florida. Dade County, Florida was the very first drug court. And from there, it has mushroomed into having its own association, its own identity. And I knocked on every drug court door. I went to the association. Here's an app for your people, make your life easier. And they said, well, we'd love it, but who's going to do it? Who's going to monitor the people? Who's going to do it? I didn't have an answer. I said, even if it's free, I'll host the app. I'll do everything I can to help you make your job easier and help people be successful. And he said, we don't have anybody to monitor it. We don't have the people. We don't have the. I was like so sad and broken, and then shit rolled. And now it's online. We have it on Sober Life. The accountability piece, just say it's called Sober Coin Rewards. That's the name of it. So you answer 6 questions, you earn points, and you get to trade your points in for training to be a coach or to get coaching. That's what you can do. So you can build your self-esteem and self-worth by just answering 6 questions every day. Did you do something good for yourself? Did you stay drug-free? Did you? And it's like one of these instruments that's reliable and valid and all that scientific stuff. Came out of Harvard recovery scale, and it's awesome. It's awesome. So we're all happy to be able to host that. So it's soberlife.com. We have the coaching on there. We have the rewards on there. We have merch on there. We've got, of course, the water that's coming out, so you can just drink your recovery. Just drink this stuff and get better. That's the whole idea. And have fun with it, because it's a joke.
Yeah. And you actually, I was about to ask my question I don't always ask, but 90% of the time I ask at the end of the show, which is, what is your highest vision, the highest intentions you're bringing to reality right now? You just got into it, but is there any other projects that you have that you're most looking forward to right now?
Well, we're going to be live in Amazon. I'm going to hold it. Can I hold this up? Can I hold this up and show everybody? So this is what it is. So this is the new box that we just designed. We got held up a week waiting for it to be produced. So our water that looks in this bottle it's look at the horse on that bottle, right? That's the horse that you can't make it drink unless it says Sober Life on it. That's the whole idea. So that should give you the whole, right? We never take ourselves so seriously that we can't laugh at ourselves. That's the real key to life, right? Is to continue to maintain your sense of humor and never take yourself so seriously that you can't say, what the fuck, man? What the fuck? Really? I mean, really, is that the way it is? And so you can do this. You can do this. You can help support everybody in recovery by supporting the product, so we can continue to get coaches to give us a half an hour of their time to people that really, really want to get better and find that mentor and you only need one person, right? Yeah. You only need one person to help hold your hand through this thing called life. Yeah. And it's really great to travel with them.
Yeah. Amen to that. Sure. Let's, on that note, maybe we should end, because that's the truth, is you really only need one. I've had one for 16 years. And I've had psychotherapists, I've had coaches, I've had all these people, they've all contributed, but I've always had one person always there. And that's all you really need, to be honest. And, it sounds like we both have that. And
That's great.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Yeah, Harold. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell people where they can find you if they want to come and check out your work and get involved.
Most importantly, at info@soberlife.com, SOBRLIFE. Soberlife.com. If you drop a line, I'm pretty responsible on email. That's our best bet. I'm still old school with email. I do know how to text. I will text you back, 561-441-5004. The number's on the website, and it's available. I mean, we have a whole team of people that are standing by and waiting for you, and we're here to help, guide you to your best self.
Harold, thank you so much. I'm excited to meet you in person here in Costa Rica in a couple of weeks. So it's going to be a great time.
Man. Yeah. Be well. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs and Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.